Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Jonas. I'm the Director of Communications with the National Association for Business Economics. We're pleased to present today's event, which is part 2 in our CBE webinar series, highlighting the many career prospects for graduates with a degree in economics. Before we start the program, I wanted to quickly point out a few other upcoming offerings. First of all, NABE's job board is econjobs.org, where businesses and economists meet. And if you're looking for qualified candidates or you're looking for your next dream job, you can head on over to econjobs.org. Also, we have several education courses coming up that are part of our Certified Business Economist program, including machine learning and data science for economists, which will be taking place next week, November 15th through 18th online. And then in December, time series analysis and forecasting will be taking place online. You can head to nabe.com to register for those CBE courses. Okay, on to today's event. Note that we'll have Q&A open throughout today's discussion. You could submit a question to the panelists at any time using the Q&A box. It's my pleasure now to introduce our moderator, Julia Coronado, as founder and president of MacroPolicy Perspectives and the current vice president of NABE. Okay, Julia, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Chris, and welcome everybody. I know we have quite a mixed audience, including people in undergrad, people who are coming out of graduate school, people who are already in the job market. Our focus today is to bring in some people that have very established careers in finance. And they are going to provide you with their perspectives on what it means to be an economist in finance. What does a day in the life look like? How do you secure a job in finance at different levels? What are some tips there? And then what are just kind of the skills you need? What is it? How are you effective in being an economist in this industry? We've got 4 amazing economists. We have Jay Bryson, Managing Director, Chief Economist at Wells Fargo Corporate and Investment Bank. We have Igor Cesarec, Vice President on the Global Economics team at Citi. We have Lisa Emsbo-Mattingly, Director of Research and Global Asset Allocation at Fidelity Investments. And we have Peterson, Chief Economist at the Conference Board. So we're going to keep the discussion free-flowing. Before we start, Chris, I believe we have a polling question for our attendees. Is that correct? All right, so there you go. Here's the polling question. How do you interact with financial markets? Check all that apply. And we'll give it a moment to make sure we get near complete, if not complete, participation. And we're getting there. So we've got a lot of people owning individual stocks. Very good, very fundamentally driven. We economists tend to believe in fundamentals. Many investing in mutual funds. About 1/3 of you invest in cryptocurrencies. And then about 1/5 of you don't invest in the market at all. So that's really interesting. Most of you seem to be engaged in the market in one way or another, and a lot of you very directly. With that, I'm going to kick it off. We're going to start with just a general perspective of what is the day in the life of an economist on the teams that these 4 people manage and participate in. What is life like? What do you do in their organizations? And maybe in prior organizations that they have been a part of. So Dana, why don't we start with you? You want to tell us what is life like at the Conference Board? What have you done as an economist in other roles that you've served in? Since I know you've been you were also at Citi before as well. So why don't you start by giving us a sort of a very brief trajectory of your career, and then what it means to be an economist in finance from your perspective.
Sure, absolutely. My career started at the Federal Reserve Board down in Washington, D.C. straight out of college. I was an intern for 2 years during the Greenspan years, so that was a while ago, but that was super exciting. And then after that, grad school. And then I had the opportunity to work at Citigroup for 18 years in different roles. First, I was on the US economics team, and then I stayed on the team, but then I also covered Canada. So I became a North America economist minus Mexico. And then pretty late in my career there, I joined the global economics team under Catherine Mann, who is now a governor of the Bank of England. And also I worked together with with Igor. There was also another guy named Cesar we worked with, but Igor on the global economics team. And then last year I joined the conference board as chief economist. So as chief economist, I'm still doing a lot of things that I did at Citi, still writing research, still getting on the media, talking about our data and our insights, speaking with clients, and also managing a team of about 20 researchers.
And then wouldn't you say, so a lot of your job is communicating economics through writing or speaking to media, clients, et cetera. How does your time break down between actually doing the economics and communicating the economics?
It's kind of I would say a third of my life is spent doing economics, like actually doing research, writing papers and op-eds. And then a third of it is spent with our we call them members, not clients, but communicating what our thoughts are for roughly 77 different economies. And then the other third is administrative, which I'm sure no one wants to hear.
Right. But part of every job. And especially because you're now in a management position, probably the mix has shifted over time.
It has. Certainly while I was at Citi, I would say roughly 75% of my time was producing research, and then 25% was communicating that research to our clients as well as via the media.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Dana. Jay, why don't you give us a brief trajectory of your career and what it has meant to be an economist in your experience in finance?
Right. So after graduating from graduate school, my first job was at the University of Alabama. I was on the faculty down there, economics. Was there for like 3 or 4 years. I left there. I went to the Federal Reserve in Washington, like Dana. I was probably there a little bit before she was. I worked in the division of international finance there. And I was at the Fed for about 5 years. And then I moved to the private sector with a predecessor bank of Wells Fargo. What a day in the life looks like here. And like Dana, I do a lot of management sort of stuff now. So I won't really talk about my role per se, but we essentially have 2 roles here. One would be what's called an analyst. And these would be our younger people. These are generally people who've just graduated from college. And what they are doing is they are backing up the economist in terms of research. So, in the morning, almost every morning, there's some sort of data release that comes out of one of the statistical agencies. And we typically write up reports that go out to our clients on that. So what the analysts are doing is they are getting the data, they're making charts, things of that nature. They're helping the economists who are actually then writing the actual reports. So the mornings here are pretty busy with the data releases and things of that nature. Things start to slow down in the afternoon. And that's when the economists and the analysts focus on more longer term sort of research sort of projects. And, as Dana mentioned, what we do here as well is we're communicating those economic insights to our clients, either orally or verbally. Back in the day before COVID, it entailed a lot of travel. So our economists were on the road visiting with clients, speaking in public forums, things of that nature. Or it's also, so now it's a lot more written communications as well. So the analysts here, again, who are people who've just graduated from college or a few years out of college, working very, very closely with the economists to produce, written and oral research. You're on mute, Julia.
I should note that both you, when you and Dana are talking about the research you're doing, it tends to be mostly focused on from a macroeconomic perspective, correct?
That's correct. At least here, we don't do a lot of sector sort of research. Mm-hmm. We leave that up to our equity analyst and our fixed income analyst to do that. So here, at Wells Fargo, and I think this is probably true for most major investment banks as well, it's more macro sort of research.
So the data you're covering is macroeconomic data releases like today's inflation report. That was pretty exciting. All right, thank you, Jay. Igor, why don't we go to you? What is your career trajectory been, and how would you describe your role from kind of a day-to-day perspective? What do you do? How do you spend your time?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Julia. So, very briefly on the background. So I did, economics throughout my schooling. So I did my undergraduate actually in London at the London School of Economics. Unsurprisingly, I did economics there, and then did my PhD here in the US at NYU. Got involved in a lot of different research projects all along, so spent some time down at the IMF, working on a research project up at Harvard on another research project. But career-wise, I have mostly been in the private sector. So I used to work at Morgan Stanley back in the day, and I've now been at Citi for several years, as Dana already pointed out, where we overlapped for a couple of years. So I sit at Citi. I sit in the global economics team. So that kind of gives us, the flexibility and the ability to really focus on different important themes and topics that are pertinent to the global economy. So we don't focus on any particular country, any particular region. We really kind of view the global economy as one. Going or talking about this after both Dana and Jay, I'm afraid I'm just going to underline most of the things that they were already mentioned, because a lot of my workflow is actually very similar. From the point of view that I would break it down also into doing the actual work, doing the analysis, the macroeconomic analysis, and so on. And then the second part, which is communicating it on to relevant stakeholders, right? Mm-hmm. And we do that both through written communication. So we write reports or papers, but obviously, as Jay pointed out, also through verbally, right? So it used to be meetings, now it's mostly a Zoom, and that would be both internal stakeholders. So we do talk to people internally, because a lot of parts of the bank are obviously very interested in the macroeconomic view that we have, but even more importantly, externally to clients, which for Citi are some of the major asset managers, investors, hedge funds, corporates, and so on and so forth. I would also kind of echo Jay's point there that, some teams, especially ones that cover particular economies, would get very busy with data releases and write up reports on that. So our immediate team doesn't do that, but we certainly have teams internally that do that for sure. But our team kind of has a mandate to write more about the thematic, or has a much more of a thematic approach. So we really can, pick a topic, say inflation or labor markets or supply chains, all these big topics that we're talking about now, and really drill down into the details, do the macroeconomic analysis, see how those issues affect, different parts of the economy and, the global macro economy as a whole.
And when you write a report in finance, that's typically about how long are the reports you're writing?
I mean, that can vary a lot. So one thing that I would say, and especially coming from more of an academic background myself, the papers that people write in the private sector, the papers people write within financial institutions are pretty different from academic papers, right? Mm-hmm. So they have to be a lot more topical or pertinent to what's happening in the economy right now. It has to be relevant, because at the end of the day, the consumers of our research are our clients, right? Investors and corporates and so on. So it has to be relevant to them, right? So it has to be kind of something that people are interested in right now. When it comes to length, it really varies. I mean, the shorter reports, the ones that Jay mentioned before, the data releases, that's typically, a one pager or two pages or something like that. The more in-depth reports, I mean, we've written everything, between sort of a few pages to maybe even 100 pages. Some of the Citi GPS reports, which really kind of go in depth and really deep dives into into important topics, would be sort of 100 pages long. And, Dana has certainly participated in a few of those. So they can really vary in terms of length. So there isn't really a standard, I would say, but more often than not, it is sort of maybe in the 10, 15 page range with charts and with everything else.
Right. So, and how would you say that your stakeholders, as you call them, both the internal people and the external clients, how do they use what you do?
Yeah, I mean, they use our insights into the economy. They use our forecasts. One thing that we also produce is basically forecasts about the major macroeconomic indicators. We do those bottom up, right? So we have our country economists submit their forecasts, and then we kind of aggregate them into a global view. And those forecasts cover several different macroeconomic variables that are relevant. So yeah, that's what people are typically interested in. So what are we forecasting for the future, and also how do we explain some of the things that are happening right now? You mentioned that there's a CPI report this morning. So typical kind of question that we would get is, well, why does this matter? How does that impact markets? How does that impact the macroeconomy? So they're trying to get these kinds of insights from our work.
Okay, great. Thank you. So Lisa, let's go to you. Last but certainly not least, your career trajectory and what you do every day.
Sure. So I, after graduating from college, I went and worked for a place called DRI McGraw-Hill, which was a macro forecasting shop, and now is part of IHS Market Insight, I think. And I was on the international forecasting team. And what was wonderful about that was it was all data and econometrics. And so, and macro modeling. So that I learned a ton. I learned a lot about programming, et cetera. And that was wonderful training. I went to graduate school. After graduate school, I went and worked for, before I went to graduate school, I also worked for another company that did something called industry impact analysis. This is sort of a regulatory analysis that economists very often do. When I left graduate school, I basically ended up at Fidelity Investments, which is where I am now. So I've been here for some time. And I would say the role has really evolved. And some of you have maybe noticed that the NABE is called the National Association for Business Economics. My title is not economist. It was sort of in the first half of my career, but it is no longer. I'm the managing director of research for asset allocation at the firm. And so the role has really evolved over the last couple of decades. And the team that I run is a group of everything from PhD economists to CFAs, certified financial analysts. I have a couple of CBEs. I have some undergrads, and it's a broad swath of things that we work on. Our number one objective function is working with the portfolio managers here at Fidelity, who are running the first and foremost are what we call multi-asset class solutions. That's everything from the college savings plans that you may have heard of, or target date retirement plans, or managed accounts, et cetera. We're helping the portfolio managers navigate the current environment and make recommendations both in terms of portfolio construction and also active asset allocation. One of the things that I would highlight is my team also does a lot of not just macro work and what the implications are for the markets, but also a lot of micro work. So we do a lot of, we do behavioral economics, we do participant demographics. And so it's a really fun group of folks that work with us day to day. I don't know if I've answered the question, but that was my attempt.
Right. No, that's good. So common thread across our panelists. Sometimes you get your undergrad degree, you go into some type of a research assistant job. Then sometimes you go back to school and get a degree and then move on. Some have been to academia, some have been through the Fed and other public institutions like the
Julia,
IMF.
I was just gonna say, I don't know. I feel like I've been hoodwinked into this panel because all the rest of you have been at the Fed and I have not. So.
But I think that's great. That's important because there are others that have never been at the Fed that are also very successful in finance. Some have PhDs, some do not have PhDs. So there's a variety of paths, and I think that's important to highlight. You can go through the Fed, and you can do that through a research assistant or a summer internship as a way of understanding the field better. But you don't have to. You can go to a research assistant position directly in the finance sector, right? That's what you did, right? You are at, well, DRI isn't, it's a forecasting shop. It's a macro forecasting shop. And so, you can go that route as well. And I think that segues nicely into another round of questions. And Lisa, we'll just stay with you and then kind of go back through. And one of our panelists posted this question, but it was also naturally on the list. What are the skills? So it's clear from your what you're talking about that you're delivering a view of the world, macroeconomic and otherwise, to people that are managing money and making decisions about how to allocate capital. And that's one way, shape, or form, whether you're in a bank or an asset manager, that's basically the function of an economist. What are the skills you need? I've heard a lot of charting and data coverage. Lisa, what are the critical skills you need?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. I would say the reason I'm not in academia is I love empirical economics. I love working with data. I love trying to figure out what's going on and why. And I think econometrics is like a really, really important skill. Understanding how to work with data, how to aggregate data, how to dissect data is super important. And also a thought process. So, the reason that I think economists are so successful in today's sort of high-tech world is that we have frameworks for thinking about problems. And I think that's a really important skill. The last thing that I would just mention is what you heard from all of us, which is communication. So, I have to my team spends a huge amount of time communicating with the portfolio managers because we want to get the investment ideas into the portfolios. We also do writing and speaking publicly. But I think data skills, thinking skills, and communication skills are top of mind for me.
Yeah, as a person myself in the field, I would say you definitely having the data bug is an essential ingredient. You need to really love that. If you think it's painful and awful and like watching paint dry, then you will hate being in finance because people want you to say, this is what you need to pay attention to in the inflation report. Here's what matters. Here's what doesn't. And to do that well, you need to know how that data is constructed and seasonally adjusted and blah, blah, blah. You need to love that process. So I second that. I also second frameworks because that is where we don't, I think there's always a misconception that we always need to be right or we're trying to be right all the time. It's not even always about being right so much as having a framework to process incoming information, learning from what you get wrong, moving on. This is what worked, this is what didn't, in evolving that framework as you move forward. So Igor, let's kind of go back through and tell us what you would consider, what kind of skills do you need to do the job well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to agree with everything that Lisa said and add a few things there because I think the communication part very important. The empirics and the sort of the being comfortable with the empirical approach to economics super important. I will say though, to all the students on the call who are now thinking, oh, I don't have to take any theoretical classes, not so fast, right? And it kind of ties in with the frameworks that both of you have been talking about. One thing they also have to be good at is, and having the theoretical underpinning and understanding of economics, that you're able to kind of, almost put two and two together when something, when you're confronted with a problem, and you should be able to kind of go through the theory in your mind to make sense of something that's happening. Now, obviously, the data helps, and being very good at analyzing the data certainly helps. And you need kind of both. You need the data to tell you something, but then you also need the theory behind it to kind of explain what might be going on and why that might be important. I would also say, and that's something that the question in the Q&A touches upon, are also the more technical skills, things like coding and so on. I think that's becoming more and more important. Obviously, econometrics, is an important technical skill, but adding, some ability to code can be beneficial, especially in today's world as we're sort of evolving and looking at, bigger and bigger data sets and more complex world out there. That can be very useful as well. So those would be the main things, or the main additions to what Lisa already said, but fully agree with all the points that she made there.
Igor, when you say coding, what languages specifically are most relevant in your organization?
Yeah, I mean, that can really vary from team to team. So I would say some of the more popular ones would be certainly Python, and that's getting prominence.
Mm-hmm.
But people do analysis, especially, people do econometrics and R or eViews, mm-hmm. and so on. Even Stata, but I think Python is the one that is my personal preference, and the one that I use a lot. But that's kind of still from all the work that I've done in academia, which allowed me to combine both the the theoretical modeling and the simulations with empirical work, and I just found Python was a very straightforward way of doing that. But I don't think anyone would prescribe any particular coding language. So it comes down to personal preference, and also business to business, what they're used to just utilizing on a daily basis.
And do you think, in terms of the technical skills, that you need both the econometrics and some of the coding, or is coding becoming the more sort of dominant way of processing and analyzing data through sort of machine learning and techniques?
I would say, the econometrics is a given, right? You kind of have to be strong at that. You have to, if you're confronted with a problem, as someone is explaining the problem to you, in your mind, you should already be thinking, oh, I'm going to use this approach. This is a time series question. I might run this regression. Oh no, this is a panel analysis and so on. So you kind of have to have that ingrained in you already. And I think everything that else is an add-on to that.
Okay. Great. Fantastic. Thank you for that. And I also will second that, that the theoretical underpinnings are sort of one of the basic building blocks of the framework that Lisa talked about, right? You need some kind of frame of reference to start with and evolve from. So you can't just, be flying blind. And it also tells you how other people think of the world, because those are the frameworks that other people use. So I also agree with that. Jay, what's your perspective on skills that are really required to do well in this world?
Right. So let me start with my analyst economist framework again. I would say, in terms of an analyst, the skills that are really necessary there, and again, these are the people who are just straight out of college helping the economist here. Like Igor said, you have to have coding skills. You've got to be good with that. One thing I would add would be attention to detail. At the end of the day, we rely on our analysts to get the data to us, and if the data's screwed up because of a mistake, we're going to make bad inferences based on that. So attention to detail is really, really important. And then, as you begin to go into become an economist, Many of us in this panel are PhDs, but not everyone needs to be a PhD to get to an economist level. I think it's probably good to have a graduate degree. And so in order to get a graduate degree, like a master's degree, math skills are really important, right? You have to have strong math skills to succeed in graduate school. And then as you become an economist, real strong math skills to do academic research is paramount. It's not necessarily as important here in the private sector, but a word to what Lisa had said earlier, it's communications. Back when I was a professor of economics, I used to tell my students that economics exists on 3 levels. It's, as an undergraduate, there's lots of graphs, right? That's the first level. The second level is the math. Math is just a graph is just a pictorial representation of 2 mathematical equations. The great thing about math is you can go into n space. But then the third level, and this is the trickiest level, you may think it's the easiest, but I think we all know this is the hardest. The economics in words, to put it into intuition, right? Because at the end of the day, what we're doing in a business environment is we are talking about economic concepts to non-economists. And if I present them with a bunch of equations, their eyes are going to gloss over. Right. I've got to be able to use English to explain what those concepts are. And so at an economist level, it's really, in a business environment, it's really important to have really strong intuition and then be able to explain that to people.
Yeah, no, completely endorse that one as well. So speaking to non-economists is a skill that I think, and Jay, do you agree with this, since you've been in academia as well as finance, as well as in a policy setting? I think nowhere is it more important to be able to communicate well economic concepts to non-economists than it is in our jobs. When we're, helping people who really truly are. I mean, if you're at the Fed, you're talking to other economists mostly. But in our world, in this finance world, you really are mostly talking to non-economists. If you're talking to the media, you're talking to the public, and they don't want jargon, and so that's definitely something that takes some practice as well. I mean, that's a skill that you don't always come out of school with.
That's correct. I think you have to be able to empathize with your audience. You have to understand that they don't understand a lot of the math or the concepts that we just take for granted.
Right.
And so that's another skill, that empathy with the audience.
Yes, empathy. That's nice. And for our attendees, our participants, Lisa just put a job opening link in the chat. So there you go. The Fidelity.
Well, I am not hiring, but I just want to let you know that Fidelity is hiring thousands of people. And if you just go onto that site and you search for Econ Star or Data Science Star, you get hundreds of listings. So I don't know exactly what the jobs are, but just wanted to make sure folks knew about that.
Excellent. Love the hot labor market. Love it. Dana, moving on to you. What do you think in terms of skills, and what do you need to have to excel as an economist?
Sure, I agree with what everyone said so far in terms of mathematics, computer science, and communications. I think other things you need include a bit of showmanship or showwomanship, showpersonship, and also curiosity. So what do I mean by those two things? Again, as Jay said, you're going to be communicating very complex ideas, oftentimes to people who don't necessarily understand all of what you're saying. So you need to really understand what it is that you're trying to get across so that you can explain it easily. And also when we think about how people consume content, it's through their phone, or they're watching a video or listening to a podcast. So you have to really work on your presentation skills. Do Toastmasters. Go with your boss to client meetings so that you can watch and see what he or she is doing so that you can replicate those activities. But really, presentation is so important. In terms of curiosity, being willing to dig beneath the surface. So for example, we had CPI this morning, but why was it so high? Looking at the details and understanding what things are driving the headline or the core. And that's really where the meat is. And certainly when you're dealing with institutional investors, those guys and gals are trading off of this, and they can look at the headline on Bloomberg, but what they want is added value. What does it mean for something else? What does it mean for the Fed? What does it mean for, market liquidity? And also what are some angles? And you can get that by digging beneath the surface and being curious. The other aspect of being curious is asking, what if, right? So you can have your base case forecast, which you'll work on, with your economists, or if you are an economist producing that. But people want to know what's going to go wonderfully right or horribly wrong, because certainly in the last 20 years, there's been a lot of both, right? And so people want to understand what that means. So being creative and imaginative and thinking about what are different scenarios, and then also understanding how to use scenario tools. So Lisa mentioned IHS Markit, and also Oxford. They have scenario tools, macroeconomic scenario tools, that you should, familiarize yourself with those things as well. And certainly that'll help you to understand macroeconomic indicators better. But again, being curious and wondering about what types of things can happen that can be market moving or cause policymakers to blink. So I think, those are the two items that I would add. Thank you.
Yeah, that's excellent. And it makes me, your mentioning of the word scenarios makes me think of another skill, sort of soft skill, which is resiliency, because you are going to be horribly wrong sometimes. And you're going to have to adjust your view. And that is part of being a forecaster, part of being an economist in anywhere. But in our world, I think I have found, from having been both in sort of the Fed world and being in finance, that it is both more demanding and more forgiving, right? It's more demanding in the sense that people want to say, you got this wrong. They will tell you to your face, you got this wrong. Why did you get this wrong? What are you going to do about it? And you have to absorb that and learn from it. But also, most traders get things wrong sometimes too. So they understand that that's part of the process, and they don't think that you're a complete idiot or that you're always going to get everything wrong because of that. That's actually one of the things that I love about finance, is that it's so dynamic, right? You're always exploring the frontier of what's happening in the world. So that's great. I love you bringing in the soft skills of showmanship and curiosity, and that sort of that aspect to communication. So let's move from this into advice for how to get into the field, both from your own experience and as somebody that has hired and mentored other people. What is your advice for how do you get into this field? What are the key avenues of entry to, and what's your advice on that front? Let's stay with you, Dana, and how do our attendees get into the field, and how do they find jobs?
Sure, I think it really depends upon what it is that you want to do. You may not have a plan for your whole life, but at least in the next 4 or 5 years. And so there are many different avenues. You can go to the Fed route, work at either the board or one of the banks. You can work at a nonprofit, like I do, at the conference board, and we're a think tank. So there are many of think tanks. You can work for the government, like CEA. You can also go straight to Wall Street. Either you can be in an analyst class. So for example, in research, we do have analyst classes, not so much for economics, but certainly for equity research. You can also work for a ratings agency where they're dealing with a lot of risk. And so scenario analysis is super important for them. You can also work in the media. So for example, Thomson Reuters or Bloomberg or Yahoo Finance, where they actually have economists and researchers on board that are producing content and also going on the news to convey this. So you can also go into the corporate sector. Many corporations have at least 1 or 2 economists, and those economists usually need someone to help them with their work. And so there are lots of different avenues that you can go in. It just really where do you view yourself in this world? And also know that, when you're just starting out, you can move around. You don't have to stay in any particular place. So for example, I've had experience in the public sector at the Fed, or quasi-public, the private sector at Citi, and now in the nonprofit space at the conference board. So your life can take you into many different directions, but just starting out, there are a lot of avenues, and you should explore all of them.
So corporate, banking, directly, nonprofit organizations, public policy, those are all sort of entry points, and they include, you can go there, as I mentioned earlier, get a job, have some experience, go back to school knowing better what it is you want, and then, go back to those same sets of organizations in different roles.
Julia, I would also mention NGOs like the World Bank or IMF.
Right.
Those are WTO. Those are great opportunities. And what's really amazing about them is that you might get an international assignment, because I think that lots of people who only work in the U.S. or only work on data in the U.S. have a very myopic view, and they don't understand the globality of financial markets and economics in general. So that's another avenue.
International organizations, absolutely. And you might even, if that is of interest, you might have opportunities to actually work abroad. If you are in an international organization and or even in finance, you can definitely work in other teams globally if that's something that's interesting to you. Fantastic. Let's go back to Jay. What do what is your advice for avenues to get into the field, and how do you find those? Maybe help us understand how you find those job openings or opportunities.
Right. So for the PhD candidates who are listening to this, obviously there's the academic route, right? And that generally goes through the American Economic Association. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. More on, if you go on the business sort of route, NABE has a website that you can certainly, look on there. You may also want to, these things aren't secret. You can just, you can Google who's the chief economist of Bank of America, right? And then you can probably find out who the email address for that person. Shoot them an email, right? You can do that with lots of different sort of companies that you can think of. Dana mentioned Amazon, Google, yada, 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 all those folks, right? The probability that you land a job that way is probably relatively low, but the cost of doing it that way is also pretty low as well.
Hey, that's how I got my job.
Well,
at Fidelity.
Good for you. So there's the exception that proves the rule. And then, there's other avenues as well. Dana was talking about, the Feds and the World Banks and the IMFs of the world. There's also the other federal government organizations like the Treasury Department, Commerce Department, Bureau of Labor Statistics, et cetera, et cetera. There's 50 states in the United States. They all have economic teams. That's another avenue that you could potentially explore as well. And then some of the larger cities. New York, Chicago, San Francisco, places like that probably have some economists as well. So there's lots of, so the good thing about economics is, and the data bear this out, is we economists are relatively highly paid. And the reason why is there's a demand for our services. And that demand is broad-based.
Right. So you've brought in, although this isn't the webinar that focuses on it, but tech sector companies are a big hire of economists. And some of that can be in finance because those companies manage a lot of money. And I've actually known economists on the teams that manage the money for Google or Apple. So there are finance jobs in those sectors as well. And so Jay mentioned a couple of things. Chris put up our job board, the NABE job board, a link in the chat, so that you will find some postings. Jay mentioned job openings for economists through the American Economic Association. They have mostly academic job openings, but also some non-academic job openings, and then just going to the usual job platforms. A lot of private companies or even the federal government or other state and local governments will put job openings for economists on Indeed or Glassdoor or other job posting websites. Thank you, Jay. Let's move back to Igor. Igor, what is your advice for how to get into and explore opportunities in finance for economists?
Yeah, I would say that it does depend a little bit at what level you're getting in. I think Jake alluded to that. I think if you're coming straight out of college, I think the route of being a graduate in a graduate program, a graduate trainee or analyst at a bank is a pretty straightforward way to get into finance or get into a bank. Coming out of a PhD, I would say it is a little bit different. And adding to what Jay said, for sure that the academic job market, through the AEA and the NABE job postings are very, very important. I would add that should be complemented just through going to careers websites of the places where you want to work. I mean, it sounds straightforward, but it's true, right? Because not every single financial institution will go to the AEA meeting and interview there, right? I mean, some might, but not all of them, and they might, be seeking economists or PhD economists, and it's on the careers website. It does get posted to some of the places that you mentioned, Julia, LinkedIn, Glassdoor, and so on. But just make sure you identify the ones where you'd be interested, where you would be interested in working, and focus on those and kind of comb through the postings that they have. I mean, sometimes it can be a daunting task, but I promise you, those postings are true. I mean, they're there because businesses are hiring, right? It's not like it's just out there and then no one ends up being called for an interview. So those are important. And I would also say, just from a more conceptual point of view, and having worked in finance both in London and here in New York, leverage your network. You might feel like you don't have a strong network right now if you're in school or just getting out of school, but try and see where you know people that might be working in an industry you're interested in, maybe through your professors, through your academic advisors, things like that. Can you leverage your network that you have to get an insight into the industry and talk to people that might be working there? And no one's gonna hire you just because you reach out, but they might say, "Well, actually, I know someone who's hiring," and they might point you in the right direction, right?
Yeah.
Leveraging that network, I think, is very, very important, and trying to kind of get the most out of that. Now, that doesn't mean to just email everyone in an address book with, "Hey, do you have a job for me?" Right?
Right.
Kind of mindful about these things. But it also does show a certain degree of curiosity and a certain degree of interest in the industry, and that can be just very helpful in the whole process.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's really excellent. I think the networking is economics is a pretty social profession, as it turns out. And so whether that network is asking professors for their advice or their experience, and or other classmates or people that have graduated from your school ahead of you, or my son, who is not an economist, he had a good friend that he worked with who found out I was an economist, and he sought me out for advice. He asked my son if it was okay if he talked to me. I connected him with the Fed, and he's now a research assistant at the Fed. So that's a perfect example of networking. It's extremely important and welcome. I think you mentioned this, Igor, and I totally agree that it can be, a very good signal of, initiative when somebody seeks you out. I think Lisa's going to have a good story for us on this front. You identify a company or a person that you want to work for, and you seek them out. There's no harm. What's the worst that they can say? "Sorry, I don't have a job opening." Oh, well, then you're back where you started. You also mentioned LinkedIn, and I do want to say, one of the issues in econ is that it's not like they hire gigantic groups of people like the analyst classes at investment banks, right? A lot of times it's like a small team at a corporation or a small team at a bank. And so LinkedIn is actually one of the social media platforms that I think is most heavily used for economists. And I have used it and I have been approached through it. So maintaining a good, robust LinkedIn profile with your activities and your resume, and I think is certainly basic step number one. So thank you, Igor. So Lisa, you have a nice, and by the way, before we go to Lisa, there's, so one question, is there a mentorship platform for econ graduates? NABE is working on that. We are working on a platform of mentoring. And I would say, actually, before I turn to Lisa, using my moderator's prerogative, coming to NABE meetings is an excellent way to start networking, applying for our scholarships to attend these meetings, our annual meeting, our policy meeting. We have regular NABE scholarships. We have diversity NABE scholars coming in, and we have the CBE program, joining the CBE program, finding out about how to become a certified business economist. NABE, that's what we're here for. We serve to network and connect you with each other and with jobs. So I'm putting in my plug for active NABE engagement as a key way to connect with finance jobs. Very good representation of finance in NABE. Very good. You see this here. On to Lisa. Lisa, what are your suggestions for how to get into the field?
So Julia, you stole my thunder. I was going to
say, I'm sorry.
Join NABE and go to if you can get a scholarship, great. But talk about networking opportunities. I've loved NABE for being able to sort of meet other corporate economists, folks who are in the finance industry, et cetera. It's a fantastic networking opportunity. The conferences are spectacular, really interesting. As I said to Jay, that is how I got my job here at Fidelity. Is I said, well, I really liked the industry work I was doing before I went to grad school. I wonder if Fidelity has an economist, and they had a chief economist, and I networked to figure out how I could get in touch with this chief economist, what their name was. I reached out, I sort of cold called them, and they gave me a chance. And so that it does work. The other story I would give is actually for folks who are in going from academia into finance. And Jay, it sounds like you did that as well. But actually you went to the Fed and then you went into finance. But I did have someone who is on my team, who is one of the most important people on my team, was a professor and was interested in exiting academia, and found a job listing that was not at all like appropriate for his skill level, et cetera, but he came in, he had done enough due diligence on what my team did. He came in and completely blew my doors off on his skill sets, his analytical process, et cetera. And I literally went to my boss at the time and lobbied to hire him into a unique role that he still has today. So I know these are sort of ad hoc sounding stories, but I think going back to Dana, I love your point about curiosity. The deal killer for me is if you come in and interview with me and you're not actually interested in what my team does, you're never getting a job from me. So curiosity and actual enthusiasm for what we do is a key sort of metric that I use when I'm looking for folks on my team.
Great,
The
excellent.
last thing I would just mention is, again, I just can't emphasize enough that list, that thing I put onto the chat. There's probably not there. I'm pretty positive there is not one economist role listed on that, more than 400 job listings that have something that says econ it or data science in it. So don't put yourself in a box just because you're an economist. There are lots and lots of jobs that require all the skill sets that you have that don't say economist. I have several colleagues who are PhD economists, and one is a portfolio manager running fixed income strategies. One is a very senior quantitative analyst in our multi-asset class strategies. So being an economist is a great skill set. It doesn't necessarily have to be the banner next to your name.
Yeah, and actually, Lisa, you're like my hero on that front because, your job is a little bit different, right? You're an economist. You're one of the ones whose views I respect and seek out the most. But you're actually kind of a strategist in a way, in addition to being an economist. And so, yeah, I think that's great advice to be open to opportunities that use your skills and maybe satisfy all of your curiosities, but in a way that you didn't imagine. All right, so let's do a lightning round of what's the one piece of advice that you wish somebody had given to you when you were starting your career? Lisa, do you have something?
I think you said it, Julia. Don't be afraid to ask. There's nothing wrong with reaching out to ask, to network. Networking is a really scary thing. And I think that's probably, there's nothing wrong with asking.
Yeah. And it rapidly becomes less scary when you do, because people are generally pretty nice. Great. Excellent. Jay, what is the one piece of advice you wish somebody had given you?
Work on your communication skills. Whether or not you go into economics or whether you do something else, communications is really important, regardless.
Yes.
So work on that.
I second that too, because as somebody who's managed teams, if you can write well or communicate well, oh my God, you make my job so much easier as your boss. So I totally agree with that as well. Igor, what's your advice, or the advice you wish you had been given?
Yeah. So I would say that's probably a little bit more skewed towards the crowd that's on the PhD route. But I would say that especially because PhDs tend to be, you get very specialized, and it might almost feel like you're in a silo. But I would say to all the PhDs out there, just be very, confident about the things that you're doing, the knowledge and the skills that you have, even though you might feel that you're kind of focusing on one little detail of the sub detail of something. Actually come out to the real world and you realize you have a very strong set of skills that, as Jay said before, are very much in demand. So, don't think yourself as just someone who knows your little subfield, but, be open to kind of exploring all the different options that you have with the PhD background.
Yeah, you've got a good toolkit. Excellent. Excellent. Dana, your advice?
Sure. If someone told me to have lots of mentors and people to help guide me, because a lot of times I was flying blind, like I accidentally got a job at the Fed. I mean, I was at a job fair and I just put my resume in the box and they called me. So, but I had no idea what I was doing. So I think definitely reaching out to other economists, use LinkedIn as a way to connect with people. And again, as Julia said, a lot of people are pretty nice and they will speak with you. And we do have a job at the conference board.
Nice.
Yes, it's not on my team. It's actually, we're looking for a public policy economist. So if you like politics and you like econ, give us a ring.
Contact Dana.
And
All
you're
right.
going to get a lot of invitations on LinkedIn right after this.
Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, panelists. You guys were amazing, and I hope this was useful. And get involved in NABE, and you'll get more of this.
That's great. Thanks, Julie. I want to thank everyone for joining today. Before we sign off, I did just want to mention next week, we have a couple webinars, including one on the economic impact of the Build Back Better Act. We have Doug Elmendorf, Douglas Holtz-Eakin, and Mark Zandi joining us next week. And this is a members only webinar. If you're not a member of NABE and you're a current student, you can join for just $30 a year. The next day, on Thursday, November 18th, we have the Holiday Retail Outlook with James Bonaker from IHS Markit, Tim Quinlan from Wells Fargo, I believe on Jay's team, and we have Jack Kleinhans from the National Retail Federation. The recordings of all NABE webinars are available through the NABE Connect app, which can be downloaded through the App Store or Google Play. Also, if you're a member, you can download webinar recordings on the NABE.com digital archive. That does conclude the event today. I want to thank everyone again.